You know, when it comes to movies, I don't tend to put a whole lot of stock in rumours, leaks, and hearsay these days. So when I heard all kinds of crazy stories from behind the scenes of Indiana Jones 5 about ridiculous time travel plots, old Indy meeting young Indy during World War II, which ultimately changes his own personal history and blinks him right out of existence so he could be replaced by a newer, more diverse Indiana Jones written for the modern audience, I was inclined to dismiss it as just another piece of wild speculation. Cause let's be real here, YouTube and bullshit go hand in hand most of the time. Then the first trailer for the film finally dropped last night, and when it was over, I was struck by a simple and stark realization. Oh god, the rumours were true. I mean, the very notion of doing a fifth Indiana Jones film more than a decade after Crystal Skull seemed like a pretty bad idea right from the start. Say what you will about that movie and the wisdom of casting Shia LaBeouf. Do it! But it at least felt like it brought Indy's story to a satisfying conclusion. Yeah, he was definitely showing his age in this one, but he was still able to hold his own when it counted, allowing him to make a dignified exit without becoming a complete embarrassment. He was finally married to the love of his life, and we'll forget about the slightly questionable start to their relationship.
I never meant to hurt you.
I was a child. I was in love. It was wrong and you knew it.
He'd gone on one final adventure and he was ready to settle down and put all that stuff behind him, enjoying his autumn years with the woman that he loved. And there was even a strong implication that his son was getting ready to follow in his footsteps and carry on his father's legacy. Like I say, it wasn't great, but it was enough to get the job done, and it really felt like that was the end of the road for Indiana Jones. Rumours of a fifth film did the rounds for a couple of years before George Lucas wisely concluded that he was out of ideas and gave up on the project. Unfortunately, he made the crushingly terrible mistake of signing the rights over to Disney, who are always on the lookout for another legacy IP to strip mine for every dime they can get. How's that Willow remake working out for you guys? And once they'd finished crushing the life out of Star Wars, it was sadly inevitable that they would set their sights on a new victim. And so, here we find ourselves staring down the barrel of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. What the fuck is a Dial of Destiny? Is it like some gigantic rotary phone that gives you a hotline to God? Nah, whatever. The point is, this movie's been at the centre of a swirling cloud of speculation and rumour for a couple of years now, with a bunch of insider leaks and revelations helping to flesh out the story. And what they had to say didn't sound good. An elderly Indiana Jones from the late 1960s discovers a magical device and ends up travelling back through time to World War II to stop a group of bad guys from changing the course of history. He's accompanied by a young female professor who becomes the sidekick for the bulk of the story and ends up running into a younger version of himself. And when that version is forced to sacrifice himself to stop the bad guys, old Indiana Jones is erased from existence, and the young female professor has to take up his mantle and continue her stunning and brave adventures on a Disney Plus show. And now that I've seen the trailer and had a good chuckle at the laughably bad CGI work, seriously, you could at least make his head line up with his body. And the incredible gunplay on offer. Nice shooting, guys. I often like to fire at the wall directly behind a person that's just ducked out of sight. Not to mention the Star Wars references that are about as subtle as a rainbow-coloured battle tank. I'm forced to conclude that those rumours all sound shockingly plausible now. I mean, I'll say one thing, the trailer gets off to a decent start by showing us Indy and Salah back together again for the first time since Last Crusade. Seriously, it was an absolute crime leaving him out of Crystal Skull. Although I have to say, what's with this weird modern trend of rehashing classic theme songs as slow, mournful piano numbers? Like we're sitting there on the toilet depressingly reminiscing about the faded glory of the old franchise when we were still young and it was actually fun and exciting, while staring into the bottom of a half-drunk bottle of cheap whiskey and wondering whether or not to stick a sharpened pencil up our nose and headbutt the table. Wait, what? Anyway, we know for sure that a digitally de-aged Harrison Ford is heavily featured in the trailer, as well as multiple scenes that are clearly taking place in the 1940s, and unless this is all a cheeky little pre-credits flashback scene, which is pretty unlikely since we see Indy in multiple outfits, locations locations and times of day, it seems pretty likely that time travel is the best explanation here. And if you're ever in doubt about the thinking behind modern movies, simply apply Drinker's Razor. All things being equal, the dumbest explanation is usually the correct one. And by golly, this all just gives me a big old dose of the sad. Apart from the obvious example, name me one movie franchise where time travel has been introduced and it actually turned out to be a smart, well implemented plot mechanic. Oh wait. I mean, don't get me wrong, I can certainly understand their reasoning behind such a desperate move. Having an elderly Indiana Jones mooching around in the late 1960s with its roughly contemporary technology levels and social attitudes is so far removed from his classic adventure serial roots that it would be like having a Star Wars movie set in a BDSM club. Actually, that sounds pretty awesome now that I think about it. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull proved that the Soviets weren't particularly interesting antagonists because they didn't embody the same level of outright evil as the Nazis, or this guy. Yeah, they were definitely ruthless and willing to do bad things, but the film couldn't really invite you to hate them as easily or completely as the baddies from the earlier movies. And let's be real here, the idea of modern Hollywood having the balls to portray communists as the bad guys is about as plausible as Kathy Griffin saying something that's actually funny. So I guess time travel was the quickest and easiest way to bring back all that lovely stuff they wanted so badly. A young indie that can still kick ass, evil villains that are easy for the audience to hate, unless they happen to be Kanye West of course, and a setting that's much more in keeping with the Indiana Jones aesthetic. The problem is that time travel is a big old narrative can of worms that you open up at your peril, because once it's open, it's very difficult to close again. And it also leaves you vulnerable to a whole lot of questions that usually don't have any satisfying answers. Basically, time travel is the nuclear option as a writer. It's the thing you do when you can't think of anything else to do. And if you want an example of how messing with previous events can absolutely nuke a movie, then just take a look at Terminator Genisys. The other big source of concern here is Helena, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I mean, I can't exactly say I was surprised by this character's inclusion when this is a project directly overseen by Kathleen Kennedy, whose one and only creative impulse with anything she's involved in seems to be, hey, what if we replace this character with a woman? Great idea, Kathy. Shall we make her flawed, vulnerable, complex and sympathetic so she can learn important lessons from the older male mentor character before he passes on, thus delivering an emotionally satisfying character arc that'll ease the transition? You're fired. And it all just feels so forced and unnecessary. We already established a younger character for Indy to pass the hat on to with his previous movie. Yeah, Shia LaBeouf might not have been the best choice to play him, but given how much time has passed since the last film, you could easily have recast the character and nobody would have cared too much. But I guess the idea of a positive father-son relationship as the emotional heart of a modern film just isn't right for modern audiences. So naturally, Mutt had to be replaced with a more diverse alternative.
Fuck.
Why? Because it simply wouldn't be a modern film unless an established and beloved male lead was killed off and replaced by a shallow, vapid, flawless and unlikable female character that you're expected to instantly like and project all that hard-won emotional attachment onto. Or else. Believe it or not, this isn't our first rodeo when it comes to this kind of thing. In fact, gender swapping the lead characters in popular legacy IPs has become so cliched and tiresomely predictable that it's practically a meme at this point. And yet, here we are, pushing ahead with the same losing strategy like the endless flops and failures of the past 10 years are all completely unconnected. No, it's the audience that's wrong, don't you see? My one tiny source of optimism for this movie is that it's at least got some talented people working on it. The writers were responsible for Edge of Tomorrow and Ford vs Ferrari, both fantastic movies, and James Mangold's directed some of the few genuinely good movies of the past several years. But then again, as past experience has taught us, even good writers and directors can still produce shit films if they're not given the creative freedom they need, and I get the distinct impression that this is the kind of movie that was mandated and largely controlled by the studio. I mean, after a series of extremely expensive flops, Lucasfilm and Disney really need this one to succeed. And if the other rumours I've heard about the disastrous test screenings turn out to be correct too, well, then I suggest you strap in, because the dial tone of density is going to be a fucking wild ride when it comes out. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.